Nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to this module from the New Zealand Dementia Foundation's Dementia STARs education series. Dementia STARs is a series of 8 modules covering some of the most common topics that caregivers work with every day when supporting people living with dementia. You are an extremely important part of the network of people who work in dementia care, and we hope you find this course very helpful for your work. We all experience the world through our senses, and we often help ourselves feel better through seeking out comforting sensations. Perhaps you've snuggled up on a sofa with a soft blanket and a nice warm hot chocolate to unwind. We often think of dementia as being all about memory, but it's so much more than that. Dementia can affect all of the senses as well as the skills to organise these kinds of sensory choices.
Tēnā koutou, e tipu aki ao ke murahiku, ko G te whānau, ko Susan toko ingoa, ko tēnei taku mihi ngā tangata whenua o te rohi nei. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou, nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Susan G and I'm a dementia researcher and educator. I'm also the liaison officer for the New Zealand Dementia Foundation. I'm so glad that you can join us for this Dementia STARs session on senses and dementia. Providing support involves sensory experiences, whether it's the sound of cleaning or the feel of personal cares or even the sight of your cheery smile. Thinking about how we can make the most of sensory experiences can help us to add value to what we do. It can be an opportunity to add pleasure and joy into the day and to bring comfort and reduce stress. Here's Nick and Cheryl, who are family carers, to give us their insight.
The Joy Zone are moments. You create moments for your loved one, for your resident. It's got to be about moments because that's all you can capture. And those moments make a difference. It may not last all day, may only last a moment, but creating joyful moments where you can connect, make them laugh, allow them to sing, smile, be happy, feel that they matter because they matter. They're human beings. They deserve to be loved, supported and cared for with integrity and dignity. They still hear things, they still feel things. And what we make them feel is up to us. How we make them feel is up to us because they will mirror our behaviour. So if we walk in the room and we're all, they're going to get their back up. They will mirror the behaviour. So no, you bring joyful moments, you bring the biggest smile you can, you bring music into their life, you make a difference.
I'll give you an example of Bobby. Bobby was in the rest home, the care centre that my beautiful wife Annie was in. And Bobby was quite disruptive. You know, we have sundowning in the evening. Everybody gets a bit agitated, you know, at the end of the day and things are getting out of hand. Some people are shouting, some are screaming. Bobby always wanted to go to heaven, and she was very disruptive to everybody else, screaming at the nurse, "I want to go to heaven." So what does the nurse say? "No, sorry, Bobby, don't be silly. You know, you're on earth. You know, you're in a hospital. You know, you're in a nice place, or you're in a care centre." And I sat there one day, and the light bulb came on, and I said, "Bobby, you want to go to heaven?" I said, "I'm going to take you." Got her to put her in a wheelchair. I took her through the gardens of the home, showed her the roses, told her how beautiful the roses are that God produced. I said, "Look, he's even got blackbirds and starlings." She still wasn't too happy. She said, "But where do I live?" I said, "He's got a special room for you." I wheeled her back in, took her to her bedroom where all her family photographs were displayed, bunches of flowers. And I said, "Look, he's made a comfortable room here for you." Took her back in. That was the end of Bobby's disruptive behaviour.
When we think about Nick's story, we can see how the sensory experience of the garden played a role in reducing distress. Nick and Cheryl also remind us that the relationship is an important part of how sensory experiences are positive. There's a basis of establishing trust and knowing the person as a whole person and not just a disease or a task. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can work together with a person we're supporting to find out what sensory experiences are useful for them to help their well-being and emotional balance. This concept is known as sensory modulation, and we all do this without giving it a formal name. For example, some people have a range of music playlists. They have a playlist that's good for when they want to chill, and they have another playlist for when they're doing a really intense workout. Some people do this with herbal teas. They have a blend that they use when they want to unwind and relax, and another that they use when they're feeling a bit jaded and want some get up and go. These people are using their senses of sound and taste to help them to get into just the right state for that moment, whether they want to settle down or perk up. Now, we each respond differently to sensory experiences. My music playlist is probably different than your playlist. My favourite herbal teas might be totally different to yours, or I might not like herbal teas at all. As we go through this session today, we'll explore some of the questions we can ask to help make the most of sensory experiences for an individual living with dementia that we're supporting. We'll be talking about what helps us to help people to feel just right. We want to know about preferences. How much sensory stimulation is comfortable for them? Are there particular sensations to avoid? We want to think about challenges. Are there sensory challenges to be aware of, and how can we help compensate for those? We want to develop up a toolkit of sensory experiences for that unique individual that we might try in different situations. First though, let's take a little detour to talk about the 7 senses. There are the 5 senses we all probably learnt at school: touch, sight, taste, smell and hearing. There are also 2 more senses that are related to body movement. Our vestibular system includes our inner ear. It helps us to sense balance, where our body is in space, and movement. Proprioception uses receptors in our joints, muscles and tendons to sense movement and tell us where our body parts are. For today, we're going to group those together as body movement senses. So when we're thinking about preferences, we want to work together with a person to use sensory experiences to help their well-being and emotional balance. But how much is too much? How much is enough? That varies. We're going to think about this as, how big is your sensory kete or basket? People vary in how easy it is to stimulate their nervous system. We can think of this with the metaphor of a sensory kete. We need to keep our kete filled with supplies to keep us going. Some people have a small kete though, and it can't hold very much. It's easy for the amount of sensory information to be too much and overflow the kete. Other people have a large sensory kete. They need lots of sensory input to fill it up, and it may need to be topped up frequently. Some people are in between. To help us think about our sensory kete, we're going to do a brief quiz. Now, this isn't a formal sensory profile, it's just a fun way to start us thinking about our sensory preferences.
I'm going to give you 2 options, and for each, I want you to choose the option that is most like you. Which sounds more your style? A rocking chair, or B, a roller coaster? Which room would you be more comfortable spending time in? A, the plain one, or B, the colourful one? Which one sounds like you? A, you cut the tags off your clothes so they don't scratch, or B, you like to keep your hands busy? Which sounds like you? A, you cover your ears when the fire alarm goes off, or B, you like to have background noise like music? Which sounds more like you? A, I don't like strong perfume, or B, What's the point of perfume if you can't smell it? Which sounds more like you? A. Mild food, please. I'm a bit of a fussy eater. Or B. Hot and spicy food, please.
What were your answers? The responses marked with A were things that might be chosen by someone who's pretty sensitive to sensory input. The choices marked with B were some examples of how someone might seek out more intense sensory experiences. Now, you might have found that you picked A for some things and B for others. We can think of the different senses as a series of kete, and they don't all have to be the same size. If we notice or find out about these different kind of preferences, we can use them as we support people. For example, if Mrs. McCaffrey seems to respond really well to smell, we might think about a scented shampoo for the shower and scented lotion for her hands afterwards. We might talk about how good lunch smells. We might take a moment to smell flowers or fresh fruit. We might even look over some old recipe books, talk about what she loves to bake, and sniff some vanilla and cinnamon. On the other hand, if Mrs. Ahmed is really sensitive to smell, we might go the other way. We might make sure that the smell of the shampoo isn't too overwhelming. We might use an unscented hand lotion. And we might make sure that the products that we use, like deodorant or perfume, aren't too overwhelming as well. So we're already starting to see how being aware of people's sensory preferences can make a difference. Our second question about preferences is whether there are particular sensations that the person really doesn't like. So what do you dislike? Here's some sensory experiences to start you thinking. Someone fiddling with your teeth. Someone tickling your feet. Seeing a spider. Running water on your face. Sudden loud noises. Imagine if a person had a lifelong fear of dentists and people fiddling with their teeth. If we know that, we can adapt how we go about helping them to clean their teeth. Being aware and respectful of people's fears and dislikes around sensory experiences is a really important part of what's called trauma-aware care. People come into our care with a lifetime of experiences, and some of them may be traumatic. These can shape how a person responds to a particular sensory experience. We can apologise and let them know that we understand that this sensation was horrible for them. We avoid that sensation if we can, and we try to do things differently to make the experience okay for them. We look for ways to help make them feel safe. Let's move on to look at some of the changes related to senses that are common for people living with dementia. Now, these changes can make it harder for people living with dementia to keep their sensory kete filled to just the right level. Sometimes we can receive more sensory information than our brain can process. Imagine that we put on your favourite TV program. That's pretty nice. Now let's put on your favourite song at the same time. And now let's put on a podcast as well. And there's a car alarm going off next door, and now I come in and I want you to fill out a form for me right now. You might feel like you can't concentrate and you can't think. You might be a bit snappy with me because you're feeling stressed, irritable, anxious and overwhelmed. What we've described is a situation of sensory overload. That's pretty unpleasant. Many people living with dementia find that they get overwhelmed like this more easily. When we think about our environment right now, there are actually lots of different sources of sensory input. You might be able to hear your computer or traffic. You might be able to see outside the window. But your brain is able to focus on me and put the other things into the background. The part of the brain that manages this selective attention is the frontal lobe. And when the frontal lobe is impaired by dementia, people can lose this ability to selectively attend and focus on just one thing. So all those sounds and sights can be coming into their brain as if they're equally important. You can imagine how easy it is for that to be overwhelming. How can we help compensate for this? A top tip here is to think about noise. Noise often contributes to sensory overload for people living with dementia. Sometimes the environment has noise in the background like a television, radio or music. The very idea of background noise takes it for granted that you can put those noises into the background and concentrate on something else, and that's selective attention. So background noise can be overwhelming and make it harder to concentrate on a conversation or an activity. We can check with the person and turn background noise off before we talk with them. This can help the person to hear us and also help them to process what we're saying. There's more of their attention and brain power available. Using headphones for music can be pretty life-changing for some people living with dementia. With noise-cancelling headphones, it's like the music is inside your head instead of out in the environment. And that can be a much more effective experience than having music on in the room. Now, people living with dementia can also experience sensory changes that mean they miss out on positive sensory experiences. As one quote says, "It's harder to live with dementia when you have sensory loss, and it's harder to cope with sensory loss when you have dementia." A severe lack of sensory input is known as sensory deprivation. This can be really bad for our well-being and our brain health. So what are some of the common changes? People often experience a decline in their sense of smell and taste with dementia. Actually, it seems as if the loss of smell may be a really early sign of dementia for some people, and it can show up even before they notice cognitive changes. One of the big impacts from this change is that food is less appealing, and so appetite can be affected. And we often need to pay extra attention to encourage small appetites, for example, by boosting flavour. Dementia can also affect the part of the brain that processes what we see. And this can mean that people have trouble interpreting what they see, even though their eyes haven't changed. The brain may struggle to process information from two different eyes, so depth perception can be affected. For example, a shiny floor can look like water, or a dark mat can be seen as a hole. Good lighting can sometimes help by removing tricky shadows. Someone living with dementia may also need the room to be brighter than you would. Now, we can use contrast to make visual information easier to process. We can use this idea for everything from food on a plate to a coloured toilet seat in the bathroom. As we get older, we don't process information as well at the edges of our vision, and dementia also narrows vision. It's a bit like having blinkers on. This means we might want to be careful about coming in from the side because we might startle people. And if we put food or drink outside that field of useful vision, they may become invisible. What about hearing? Well, dementia can make it difficult for people to process and understand the words that they hear. And this can be very pronounced for people with a particular type of frontotemporal dementia called primary progressive aphasia. As well as this, hearing loss is common among older people living with dementia. You may very well know that from your own experience with the people you support. Over half of people in their 70s have hearing difficulties, and about 90% of those will actually have spent most of their life hearing normally. Dementia can make it much harder to adapt to that change. Dr. Matthew Croucher is going to talk to us about hearing loss and dementia.
People living with dementia can have trouble with different kinds of messages that their senses are giving them: taste, touch, hearing, sight, even smell. But it's a little bit more complicated than it first sounds. So you think, okay, those 5 senses do all go to the brain, maybe not a surprise that dementia can affect them. But what helps us to understand it a bit more is if you think about 3 different levels. First of all, there's what's happening in the real world that's causing the senses to send a message to the brain. But then there's the bit in the middle, the eye or the skin or the ear, and problems that might be occurring there. And then finally what might be happening in the brain. I'll give you an example. If someone's having trouble in thinking, there's someone strange in my room at night, is it because in the room it was all cluttered and there was a dressing gown hanging on the back of the door and the lighting wasn't good? Or is it that there's a cataract in the eye and it's confusing the vision? Or is it just something that's happening in the brain? So it's a more complicated problem than at first it seems. The problem for people living with dementia and for us ourselves trying to help them, if these kinds of sensory changes are beginning to muddle what they're picking up from the real world, is that it causes distress on the one hand and disability on the other. So the distress is not just for the person with dementia, because they may now react in a way, perhaps if they're scared or perhaps if they get angry, that distresses us. But the disability is if I can't make sense of the environment properly, then I won't be able to use my brain at its 100% to get by in the world. It turns out that although all the different senses are important to think about when we're trying to help someone with dementia, hearing is one that's often neglected but turns out to be more important than people think. One way to think about this is by comparing vision with hearing. And it's often said that if we lose our sense of sight, we cut ourselves off from the world of things. But if we lose our sense of hearing, we're cut off from the world of people. So let's think about what are the benefits of social interaction and staying involved with other people, especially if we're living with a dementia. Well, they're actually the same as the benefits to you and me. We become lonely if we're cut off from the world of people. We become more inclined to be lost in our own thoughts that may not always be taking us in a good direction. And sometimes with dementia we need other people to set us on the right track and remind us of where we're up to and what's going on. But it turns out that there's a special link between hearing and dementia, in that if hearing is going down and is not corrected, that in itself can worsen the cognitive or memory and brain power impairment. So it's a special case. So in practical terms then, what this all means is that we can think about those 3 stages: the environment, what's happening with the bit, like the ear, how that's working, and then what happens in the brain. We can think about all 3 when we are trying to support someone. So I'll just apply that to hearing. It means that with the environment, let's keep it quiet, let's look a person in the eyes, let's speak slowly and carefully. Don't ever raise your voice, that's almost never helpful. And then what about the ear? Is there earwax that needs clearing? Perhaps hearing aids would be a good idea, and if you have them, are they in? Are they on? Is the battery in? And then thinking about what's happening in the brain. Can I help you there by perhaps not presenting my request to you in a complex way, but breaking it down and keeping it simple? So that's the secret, thinking about those 3 levels of sensory impairment and using our common sense.
Communication is an absolute priority for people living with hearing loss and dementia. We can use simple strategies to improve communication, such as reducing that background noise, speaking directly face to face, and using visual cues like gestures or objects. So that's things like suggesting it's time to brush teeth while gesturing brushing teeth, or actually holding a toothbrush. Now let's look at the last group of senses, touch. One of the losses for people living with dementia is the opportunity for caring touch. Caring touch is actually something that we're wired for from birth, and our brain responds differently to caring touch than it does to touch that's involved in tasks like washing. So what are some signs that a person may be craving touch? They might grab people's hands as they walk past or be over-familiar with hugs. We can look for appropriate ways to help provide caring touch, like hand massages and petting animals. Body movement. The senses involved in balance and movement can be affected by dementia, and people might find that they feel unsteady and clumsy, and they may tend to bump into furniture or fall. We can help to encourage safe movement. For example, reminding people about a mobility aid. And we can also be aware of how unsettling these sensory losses can be. For some people, it can be important to help them feel safe in tasks that involve their feet being off the ground, like transfers. For others, it can be important to help boost confidence about keeping active on their feet. Together with touch, the body systems are sometimes called the powerhouse senses. They can be particularly powerful in helping people to feel calmer. So that includes activities that involve resistance, like pushing, pulling, or carrying. Weighted animals or lap pads, and even chewing and sucking can all kick into these powerhouse senses. Now we can put all this information together to create a sensory ideas toolkit. When we're talking about just right, we're thinking about being in balance. It's a bit like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears story and the porridge that's too hot, too cold, and just right. So here we have our balance dial. Too little, and we feel bored and listless. Too much, and we feel overwhelmed, anxious, or frustrated. When we're feeling a bit out of balance, we can use some ideas from our sensory toolkit to help shift that dial and get it back into the just right zone. We can use sensory experiences to help to alert us or calm us. Just a word of caution, you might notice that I talked about situations where the person is a bit out of balance. Sometimes this dial can go right over into the red for too much, and the person is really upset. They might be yelling or hitting, and generally this isn't the time for sensory modulation. In those situations where someone's really distressed, we want to pull out a different toolkit of de-escalation techniques. But in our sensory toolkit, we want to be thinking of ideas we could try for things that might help the person to feel more alert, things that might help them to feel just right, and things that they might find calming or soothing. And we're looking for things that this unique individual would enjoy. There's a huge range of things we might try, but let's look at a few examples for each sense. What kind of things do people often find calming? For the body, we can think about slow, repetitive movement, like a rocking chair or winding up wool. But also activities that involve resistance, like pushing a trolley. For sight, we can think of things that have soft colours and pleasant topics. Adult colouring in books, a picture of family, or favourite scenery. For touch, we can think pressure and warmth, like massage or a warm blanket, maybe a weighted lap pad. For sounds, we can think soft and simple, maybe instrumental music or sounds of the ocean. For smell, we're thinking mild and pleasant, like rose or vanilla. For taste, once again, we're thinking mild and pleasant, and for some people also sweet. This might be rice porridge or a nice hot chocolate. So you'll see that we're often using words like pleasant, warm, soft and simple. They're often things that are familiar and might bring back positive memories. You might notice that you already use some calming techniques like this to wind down for bed. What about alerting? Well, for our body, we might think faster and more active, like clapping, stretching, or exercise. For sight, we might have things that are brighter or have movement, like doing a jigsaw puzzle or watching sports. For touch, we might find things that are hard, squishy, spiky things that people can squeeze or fidget with, or a cool face cloth. For sounds, we may be going for music that's a bit more upbeat, or maybe making music. For smell, we're using what I think of as sharper smells, like pine or citrus. For taste, we're thinking about more intense tastes, maybe spicy or sour. So these are things that are a bit more challenging and demanding in some ways. Sensory modulation involves exploring to see how that person responds. A great example is when a staff member introduced Tai Chi classes into a dementia environment. Now, most people responded to the gentle, flowing movements as being really calming. But a few of the men responded to the martial arts feel of some of the movements, and so for them, Tai Chi really revved them up. The more we know about the person, the more we can make the sensory experiences meaningful for them. Family can be a great resource to gather information. Now that we have this way of thinking, we can be looking for ways that we can engage the senses in our everyday care. Tracy Hawkes, who's a fabulous occupational therapist, is going to give you some examples in this short video clip.
When I think about some of the senses and the ways that we can use them, I think about music. It can be calming, but it can also make a party, so you can go both ways. I want us to think about how we can use vision. So vision is so important for us as human beings. Sometimes when we've got a cognitive impairment, if we're asking somebody, would you like a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, those words may not actually make that much sense. So bring in the vision, bring a cup of coffee in, or bring in a tea bag, and use the vision to enable that person to understand the context of what you're actually wanting to do. If we're seeing that someone's quite distressed, but we know that their family is actually something that helps to calm them, then let's bring in some visual of that, their photos, and actually have those conversations about their photos. I think about people that might be quite distressed, and then I think about touch. So what we want to consider is that some people will only get what we call clinical touch, so it's really just about the task. So within that, can you consider how we might be able to use some massage or some really gentle touch with a person? I want us to consider about smell. So smell is actually really important for all of us. It brings back memories and it can be soothing. We had one chap who was having difficulty sleeping, so we actually got the shower gel that had like lang lang in it, and that actually was a process for him. He loved the smell. It was calming and it enabled him to sleep. So smell is really important. It will help with eating, getting people to introduce themselves into food and the smells. There's nothing nicer than smelling toast or a cup of coffee. It gets the appetite going. So think about how we can utilize all of those senses to get a person to engage in their day and to calm them if they require it.
This completes this module about senses and dementia. I hope you're heading off with some ideas about ways to enrich the time that you spend with people living with dementia. And maybe you've got some ideas for your own self-care. It's been an absolute pleasure to share this session with you, and I hope that you'll find some time to check out the other Dementia STARs topics. Ngā mihi nui.
We hope you have found this Dementia STARs course valuable. We really appreciate the time you have taken to allow us to share some new ideas and fresh perspectives on this important topic with you. We hope you will return to your work with people living with dementia with renewed enthusiasm. It's such an important job, and you are a very precious part of the dementia family. The New Zealand Dementia Foundation would like to thank CHT Healthcare Trust for their generous support of this project. If you would like to learn more about the New Zealand Dementia Foundation's work, check out their website and join the community. This module is one of a series of Dementia STARs courses. You can find out more about the other topics from your workplace educator or on the New Zealand Dementia Foundation's website. Ngā mihi mai oha. Thank you so much for your commitment to people living with dementia.